It's really taking longevity and applying it in a pretty practical way along 3 different dimensions. So the first dimension is, do you have the quality of life to do the things you love to do? The second is, how likely are you to die prematurely from the top 5 diseases that are likely to take you out? And the third is, how quickly are you aging at the cellular level? So from my perspective and from our perspective as a company, if you can be proactive on those 3 fronts, then you're in a really good place in terms of being in control of your longevity. And we try and offer that up to our members as a new way of thinking about what it even means to be healthy, to understand those 3 questions: quality of life, risk of dying prematurely, and speed of aging. And if you can get to the confidence about how you're doing on those 3 dimensions and have a program that helps you, then you're on the front foot in a way that most people are not, and that previous generations had no way of actually doing.
I love this idea of, it's not just living a good life, not just living a long life, but living this good life for as long as you can. I think that's so well said, and I couldn't agree with you more. I think the other piece that is frankly a really good segue into just kind of describing the LifeForce experience and what the consumer is actually getting through the service, this idea of figuring out what that actually takes. What are we looking at? How do we need to behave? How do we need to show up? What should our priorities be?
Let's link up with Krysta on The Fix. She's a wellness coach with a focus on mental well-being and physical strength.
Hello, Fix listeners. Welcome back to our latest episode of the Fix podcast. I'm your host, Krysta Huber, and I have a really well-informed guest speaker for today's conversation that I'm just so excited to introduce to you guys. So I know I say every week, I'm going to get you right into the show, and I'm going to keep this quick because we cover a lot of ground in this conversation. And that is with the CEO of LifeForce, Dugal Bain. And this episode is all about longevity, but what that actually means, because it's been such a hot buzzword these days on social media, and how LifeForce as a company defines it, how Dugal defines it in his own experiences, and how he's gotten to where he is today. But we're really diving into helping people actually live their best lives. And you heard it in the quick quote at the beginning of this episode, but something that really stuck with me throughout our conversation is just this idea of, how do we live a good life for as long as we can? And I mean, that couldn't resonate even more in any better alignment with the Fitness Fix. Like, I couldn't have said it better myself. So this is the episode to listen to if you're curious about really feeling your absolute best from the inside out. And you'll hear me mention it at the end of the episode as well, but I'm excited to actually become a customer of LifeForce. Check out their service. I will be documenting it on my social media to bring you guys along for the ride and bring you along for that journey, having a phlebotomist come to my house, do some blood work, and then get to experience their health coaching, working with some of their practitioners, medical doctors, all of the things. So be sure to follow along and check that out as that kind of progresses over the next few weeks, as it will happen in around maybe the time this episode comes out. I'm recording this and then launching it a couple weeks later, but excited for you guys to just really get my take on the experience from me actually doing it too. At the very end of this conversation, we also discuss this idea of simplifying your life. And again, just something that aligns so well with the Fitness Fix. There's a lot of noise in the health and wellness space. There's a lot of confusion among what diet approach is right, what's going to help me lose weight, what am I going to be able to stick to, on and on and on. And I just really appreciate that LifeForce and Dugal kind of left us with that message. And I want to preface the conversation with that too. Yes, we cover a lot of ground. Yes, we talk about ways that we can take a more proactive versus reactive approach to our health. And the fact that companies like LifeForce are making that possible, and making it possible at a much more accessible price point, which means it's more available for the masses, which then means that you have the power to take more control of your health and do it in a way that's not going to leave you spinning your wheels. Do it in a way that's going to truly help you make a difference without feeling like you're on this hamster wheel. And I know I've been on one of those hamster wheels before. I created the Fitness Fix specifically to get off of it. and created this methodology and our approach to coaching from what I felt were mistakes that kept me stuck. So with all that said, please join me in welcoming Dugal to the FYX podcast. Dugal, welcome to the FYX podcast. So excited to have you today. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I didn't even have a chance to mention this when we were talking off air, but I've actually been really lucky to interview a few other companies that have very similar principles to LifeForce. So I think the listeners, and of course, those episodes happen to be some of our most listened to, and I get a ton of feedback on them. So I'm excited that there are more people like yourself and your team moving into this space, excited to experience it myself. And then most importantly, have the FYX listeners understand what this entire process is like and why all of this matters. And this interview is going to make all that happen. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, awesome, Krysta. It's great to be here. I live in LA, so your show's got me through some nasty traffic jams from time to time, and I love the energy you bring to the topic, and looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. I was listening to another podcast that you were on in prepping for this show. And I was going to ask you towards the end if you were a big podcast junkie, because I heard you mention that you spend a lot of time in the car. And if I were you, I would most definitely be doing the same thing. I find that I've gotten to a point of listening to so many podcasts more than TV. Like I'll be in my apartment, meal prepping or something, and that's what I'll just have on in the background instead. So I can definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. I've also got two small kids, so the chance to get a couple of hours on my own in the car and do a podcast is pretty rare. So I actually look forward to a bit of traffic.
Yeah, there you go. I like it. Nice. Well, we're going to dive right in with our little icebreaker question. Since you mentioned you have two kids, I'm assuming you may drink caffeine, but curious just with your background, if this is a part of your routine. So go-to coffee order. What are you sipping on in the morning? Are you making it at home, ordering it somewhere, or do you drink something else?
I do drink coffee. I'm a two coffee a day guy.
Nice.
I actually asked my LifeForce doctor about this a while ago because I was worried that I might be drinking too much, but they were telling me that up to double digits cups of coffee per day is usually considered in the normal range. So I think I'm fine.
I think you're good.
Yeah, exactly. The go-to at the moment is made at home. It's an espresso. I'm pretty old school, just plain whatever the name of the black Nespresso capsule is, and I run two of those through the machine, and then steam some milk and get rolling in the morning. So pretty nice. Simple. I don't like anything too bells and whistles with my coffee.
Hey, it gets the job done, and I'm like you. I like a latte. I have an almond milk latte sitting next to me. I will say it's decaf now that on my side of the country it's past 12 p.m. I try to make that transition for my sleep, and we can talk about that because it's definitely relevant to this conversation. But I, don't throw a ton of other things in there. No sweeteners. Almond milk gets the job done. So I can appreciate your order. Most of my guests, everyone's like black coffee. We're just efficient, like the taste, get it done. I think that's why.
That's right.
But awesome. Cool. Well, we're in good company. Now for the big question, the one that, like I said, is really the driver for the rest of this conversation. You're interviewed often, you're on lots of podcasts, you have the opportunity to represent the LifeForce brand. All of that's amazing, and we will get into it. However, when I ask my guests to introduce themselves for the show, I take a little bit of a spin on this question. You can give us your background, a little bit of a resume, just to introduce us to the listener and you and your story. But after that, as a follow-up, I'd love to know more specifically, why should somebody care about what you have to say?
Yeah, great question. At the sort of headline level, I'm CEO and co-founder of LifeForce. I've spent most of my career in healthcare technology. I love building businesses that help improve access to some sort of better healthcare. So that's sort of the TLDR on me professionally. But who I am sort of more as a person, and this definitely intersects with why I wanted to build LifeForce, is someone who is entering a different stage of life and has high expectations for how I want to live in this stage of my life, and felt like I didn't understand my body well enough and didn't have the support or the data around me to have the confidence that I could actually experience my 30s, 40s, 50s and beyond in the way I wanted to. And I think a lot of people listening to this will probably empathize with that feeling of being ambitious, of being competitive, of wanting to go out there and try and kick ass in whatever it is that excites you. But also noticing that as you get older, and this starts in late 20s really onwards, things are changing. You're feeling different, and there's this tension between the life you have in your mind and how you're feeling and what you're able to do. And for me personally, the reason I wanted to start LifeForce is I didn't want to shrug my shoulders and give up on that. I felt like there had to be a better solution that would give me the quality of life and the ability to show up as the person I want to be. And I'm 39 now, in these next few decades, and also the peace of mind that I was actually on track to live a long life. So that's my motivation, if I was to boil it down, and hopefully that resonates with lots of the folks listening to this podcast.
Absolutely. You nailed it. And I was planning on taking the conversation in the direction around longevity, of course. And I think it's such a buzzword too. And that's actually the angle I wanted to take it with you. And you kind of gave me some good ideas as to how you think about it already. But let's just go right to that. When you talk about this idea of what I sum up as aging versus aging optimally, right? And not just accepting the fact that, oh, I'm getting older. This is a part of life. I think there's a transition and a shift that I see so much as a nutrition coach, especially because I work with a lot of mostly women, but some guys out there too, who are 40 something and they may be experiencing things like early menopausal symptoms, or they're at a crossroads of saying, I just don't feel the same way I did when I was 35, often to not credit themselves enough to recognize all the things that they've been through, being a mom, going through childbirth, the stress of having children, having a job, wearing all of these different hats. Like life can really take a toll on you if you're not taking care of yourself. However, what I'd really love your perspective on, just in your experience professionally, but now also too, is approaching 40, right? How does LifeForce and how do you personally, I would imagine they're one and the same, really define this idea of longevity?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question that people should start to think about a little bit more critically, because to your point, longevity has become this umbrella term that means a lot of different things to different people. And when you really start to dig into it, I think all of us think about it in slightly different ways. And the way I sort of break it down is that there's one camp within this conversation, and by camp I mean both consumers and companies, that are really focused on the idea of extending lifespan. So pushing the limits of how long human beings can actually stay alive. And that's where you get the really interesting headlines around living to 130 or 150 or whatever it is. And there's certainly a lot of interesting research happening there, but it's still a very novel category. And I think it'll be a long time until we have interventions there that are really reliable or appropriate for most folks. But it's an interesting conversation. But then there's another camp which who really are more focused on how do you live a good life for as long as you can without the more of the science fiction angle of extending quality of life. And that's really more what I'm interested in, and it's more what LifeForce is focused on as well. It's really taking longevity and applying it in a pretty practical way along 3 different dimensions. So the first dimension is, do you have the quality of life to do the things you love to do? The second is, how likely are you to die prematurely from the top 5 diseases that are likely to take you out? And the third is, how quickly are you aging at the cellular level? So from my perspective and from our perspective as a company, if you can be proactive on those 3 fronts, then you're in a really good place in terms of being in control of your longevity. And we try and offer that up to our members as a new way of thinking about what it even means to be healthy, to understand those 3 questions: quality of life, risk of dying prematurely, and speed of aging. And if you can get to the confidence about how you're doing on those 3 dimensions and have a program that helps you, then you're on the front foot in a way that most people are not, and that previous generations had no way of actually doing.
I love that so much. We're only a couple minutes in, and I had to take a note because I think I found my quote and title for this episode. I love this idea of, it's not just living a good life, not just living a long life, but living this good life for as long as you can. I think that's so well said, and I couldn't agree with you more. And I think the other piece that is frankly a really good segue into just kind of describing the LifeForce experience and what the consumer is actually getting through the service is this idea of figuring out what that actually takes. What are we looking at? How do we need to behave? How do we need to show up? What should our priorities be? I know something that I've heard in just doing some research for this episode that I think is really unique, and I'd love for you to kind of talk us through, is the frequency with which you have your customer follow back up for additional blood work. I can tell you, I'll call myself a hypocrite by even bringing this up, but it's something that I'm not super consistent with. I will say though, in the past year, thanks to companies like yours, I've had a much easier time getting my blood work done because there's no friction of going to the doctor's office. Yes, I can make a doctor's appointment, but I'm going to make fun of myself a little bit and say my mom at almost 30 for me is still reminding me to book my doctor's appointments. And I'm in this space and I care about my health. And I just said to her 2 weeks ago, I'm like, I know you told me I should go to my doctor's appointment, but I did have blood work in the last 10 months because I worked with another company that I've had the pleasure of having on the show. And I wanted to learn more about the service that they were providing specifically to women. And it's great that those types of things are becoming more mainstream and popular, but I would love for you to touch on a couple things. One, would love for you to touch on just like, what's the experience like from start to finish? But two, also talk about why that aspect is really important, because I actually think that is something that sets you guys apart from the other conversations I've had with other companies in this space too.
For sure. And you brought up the point around friction, which I definitely want to dig into.
Yeah.
Because our thesis, and definitely my personal belief, is that there are millions of people in this country who are health motivated and want to be more in control of their health, whether or not they'd consider themselves, quote unquote, in good health. And so we hear a lot about people not taking care of themselves or the population being unhealthy. And for sure, there's a lot of truth in that. But I do think there's this missing phenomenon of people who are actually desiring something better, but that desire and that motivation is outweighed by the amount of friction people run into when they're trying to go out and be proactive about their health. And that's definitely what I ran into myself before starting LifeForce, and was the kick in the pants that I wanted to build this. It was that once I sort of made this decision, I was 37 at the time, I just had my first daughter. Once I sort of had this come to Jesus moment of realizing I don't actually know how healthy I am, I don't have the peace of mind of where I'm headed, and I'm not feeling like I'm showing up at my best, to go out and find the things you need to answer those questions in a way that's actually effective was extremely inconvenient, ineffective, and very expensive as well. So, where we started from was, okay, what does someone need to do this well? And it starts with the right data, which is, down to the biomarker level, understanding actually what's going on in your body and how does that compare to the optimal range, not just the normal range for the population, but the optimal range of where people perform their best. You need the right experts to interpret it, because we've seen a real proliferation of testing companies, and that's a great start, but it still places the burden on the consumer for the most part to have the expertise to really understand what the data means. So you need a team of experts to actually interpret that. And then you need to have the ability to actually follow through on the opportunities. And that might be through behavior change and lifestyle adjustments. It might be through supplement or pharmaceutical therapies. But you've got to look at those things all as just tools in the toolbox, because what a lot of people run into is this fragmentation where you're doing bits and pieces of these things from multiple different companies or multiple different partners. And you end up with everyone stepping on each other's toes and not a coherent program that is really just focused on 2 or maybe 3 top priorities for you at any one point in time. And so if you could bring all those things together, which we've done, and you could offer it at a much, much lower price point than people would otherwise be able to access these things, cobbling them all together, then you start to change the equation between this motivation that I think a lot of people have and the amount of friction that people run into in doing something. And then the retest cadence is a really important component of that, because most of us have never had a proper feedback loop in our lives around all the things we're doing in terms of health and wellness. And do we need them? Are they working? And how do we learn more about how each of our bodies responds differently to things so that we can sort of continuously improve over time? So that's the idea with us, having 3 monthly follow-ups, where and I should just lay out the experience for people so they
Sure,
know what that feels like.
Yeah.
When you become a LifeForce member, the first thing we do is send a phlebotomist to your house or to your work, wherever's convenient, to do a full blood draw. And then a medical doctor on our team's reviewing the results, also reviewing what you've told us in an onboarding survey around your goals, your health history, where you want to be in the future, etc. And then we put together a set of findings and a program that's really tailored to what's going on in your life and what's going on in your body. And then you jump on a telehealth consult to go over all of that, and then you get started on the plan. And you have a health coach on our team to work with, also particularly on the lifestyle side, to keep you on track.
Cool.
And then every 3 months, we repeat the cycle. So every 3 months, we'll come out and test you again. And then we'll actually be able to sit down together and review the program and see what's working and see what's not. And so that cadence for us is really important in just bringing more accountability to the space. It's basically us taking this position that if you don't need something and if you can't see the results, you probably don't need to be doing it. And people have a lot of energy and investment in this category, but should really be narrowly focused on the things that are going to have the biggest bang for their buck.
I'm going to start with that last point that you just made. We, in my world of nutrition coaching with my clients, we like to call what you just referred to as the big rocks, right? Like, what are the needle movers? What are the things that matter most? And I'm fully in alignment with a lot of your points just around this idea of creating an environment and a system and a structure for someone to be able to figure out, one, what the hell are those things that they should actually care about and why, right? Because you go on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, wherever, right this second, and you'll have 17 different people saying so many different things. Half of them are not even certified and truthfully shouldn't be speaking on the matter. And it's hard. Like, I don't blame my clients for their frustration that comes from contradicting information because they don't know. They are like, I guess I should listen to this person. The amount of times a day I answer a question of someone who sent me something about like a greens powder that they found on TikTok is crazy, but I'm also not surprised, right? Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that even if this person isn't my client, I really appreciate that they'd reach out and ask me for my opinion on that, because to me, that shows that I've established myself as somebody who is trustworthy and demonstrates that they do know what they're talking about and ultimately have the consumer's best interests at heart. But at the same time, because of all that confusion and because of the trends here, the hot fad there, I find that most of the people I work with, by the time they get to somebody like me, and by the time they're open and ready for the type of coaching that I do, it's actually out of a place of them being like, I've tried so many things, nothing has worked. So I'm at a point where I'm so frustrated that the only other solution I can conceptualize is trying to do all of these things at once. And I don't disagree with the logic, right? It makes sense. You're like, well, I tried this, I tried that. Maybe I should just put them together. The problem is the things you're putting together make it that much harder when you are a busy mom, a busy professional, you're wearing lots of different hats, like I was referencing earlier. And it's just like, that's not actually sustainable. And you also need somebody to hold you accountable to do it. Like, even myself, with all the knowledge and information that I have access to and know and provide for my clients, I still have a coach for that exact reason. I have multiple coaches for different areas of my life for that exact reason. And like I said, I haven't even recently been to the doctor and should certainly go. But with all of that, I think the other piece that we definitely want to really hone in on a little further is this idea of the friction, but the access piece too, because as I referenced before this, I've had other companies join me on the show. We've talked a little bit about this topic. And most recently, I had a company that you may know them. I think they do have offices on the West Coast, definitely the East Coast. But I interviewed Dr. Florence Comite from the Comite Center. I'm not sure if you're familiar with their work, but their app that they're trying to build has a similar kind of concept to LifeForce. But she told me on air, the hardest part about the work that she does is her concierge and really focused health service that she currently provides in office is very expensive. She was like, straight up, it's really expensive. I had a ton of clients listen to her interview and said to me, oh, this would be so cool, but I guarantee it's going to be expensive. And one of the things that her team is working on is trying to come up with ways to reduce the cost of this, because their bottom line goal is the same as yours, trying to get as many people as possible to have access. I know one of the ways that that company is exploring this is trying to link up with bigger companies so that the employer is taking the responsibility to cover that. And obviously there's insurance incentives, and just volume is one method to be able to do it, which I think is really interesting. But all of that said, I'd love to know, in building LifeForce, and I know that you have some pretty big names behind the LifeForce brand, Tony Robbins being one of them. What, outside of your own experience of like that point in your life where you're like, am I really as healthy as I could be? Am I optimizing this as much as I could be? At what point did you all get together and say, hey, we need to come up with a way to do this that is more accessible to most people from a financial side?
Absolutely. It was definitely a big topic for us before we started the company. And it was interesting, actually, when you look at the way that LifeForce was formed, it was a group of people coming together who are all sort of at different life stages and had slightly different experiences. So Tony Robbins is a co-founder, Dr. Peter Diamandis is co-founder, Joel Jackson, my main day-to-day co-founder, is a great technical leader. And then Courtney Ream from M13 has been a huge help for us as well. So everyone in that conversation was very, very motivated and saw this big opportunity, but for slightly different reasons. And if we look at Tony and Peter, for example, you mentioned a version of this being available at a much higher price point, which is true. There are concierge clinics, and I spoke to several of them when I was on my own journey of trying to get this sort of support, who will provide a version of good proactive care for $25,000, $50,000, $75,000 a year. And if you have the resources to do that, there's probably nothing better you could spend your money on. So snaps to you. But in reality, most people do not. And that is not a scalable way to ever bring excellent proactive care into most people's lives.
I even get people, not to interrupt you to that point though, but like, I'll also add to this, even with my coaching services, it's very hard when someone tells me, hey, I think this is too expensive. It has to be a shift of a conversation around value. But at the same time, like, I wish I could provide it at a different price point, but I'm also frankly running a business. And I also know the service that I provide to my clients who are really, really in it and see the value 100% and understand that it's an investment. So there's a fine line there of balancing it. But like you said, the average person cannot walk around and spend $50,000+ on a yearly basis, especially when we look at, just how much people are constantly commenting these days on how much their grocery bill has gone up. It's reality.
Yeah, totally. So our target for this initial phase of LifeForce was really to bring the market something that delivered this at the price of a premium gym membership.
Okay.
So
I like that analogy.
LifeForce membership costs $129 a month. That covers the testing, the phlebotomist, the doctors, the health coaches. All of that is in that $129 a month. So it is still real money, no doubt about it, but it's a fraction of what you would spend if you were trying to do this in one of those other sort of systems that I talked about. Over time, I think there's a path to bring that down further. And,
cool.
That's something we're always pushing on. There's a path to reduce the cost on our side, just in terms of, how efficient we are at doing the work. But then there's this bigger opportunity, I think, as I'm personally optimistic that we're heading into a new era where proactive health programs are going to start to receive the support that they deserve from the traditional healthcare market. And when that happens, then, all sorts of things open up around insurers and employers. And, that's the huge door that needs to be cracked open. But in the meantime, the goal of LifeForce was bring these things that only well-connected or well-resourced people could do. And I'd put, Tony and Dr. Peter Diamandis in the camp of folks who'd personally experienced the benefits at a higher price point. But all of us were saying, hey, if you could do this in a way that really makes this more widely accessible, you could unlock a ton of human potential and help a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you touched on the insurance component and the incentive of being more proactive versus reactive. And we could go on and on. We could probably record an entire podcast just around the challenges there, but also making the argument of why it makes more sense in saying, hey, if your employees are healthier, they'll produce better work. If they produce better work, is your company making more money? Like all of that just is so logical. And that is something that I can really get behind. And it's something I talk to my clients a lot about when they're sitting there trying to be somewhat of a martyr and saying, I have to put everybody else before me. I have to take care of this. I have to do well at that. And it's like, cool. Here's the thing to remember. You have all of these skills of prioritizing others, taking care of them, doing what you feel you need to do for them, yet you're spending them only on other people. Let's take that. Let's look at that as a superpower and actually transition it back to you and recognize that for that reason, you do in fact have the skills and you have a lot of the answers, but now we just really need to execute on them. So as that applies to LifeForce, you mentioned the experience with having a health coach. And obviously with my background, I'm interested in this component of the service in particular. So talk to us a little bit more about why you guys felt that was an important component to include, because I do agree with you. I think from my own personal experience and interacting with some of these other companies who are trying to build concepts like this, that's where I felt they fell short. And I also found that if my clients were utilizing some of these services without me, they would have gotten stuck. I see this often in the hormone replacement therapy conversation, that I even have a client who every couple of months, she admits to me how frustrating it is. The doctor that she's working with for her hormone therapy doesn't believe in blood work. So he asks her to go off of how she feels. And I'm over here trying really hard to help her see aesthetic changes, but also factoring in the other biofeedback. How's she sleeping? What are her energy levels like? Is she hungry? And if we're at a point where we're stuck and she's not seeing the body fat composition changes she wants, yet she's doing everything I'm asking her, of course, I'm going to go to the next step and say, there's something we're missing. Is it your hormones? But half the time, I'm the advocate for my clients of getting them the labs, getting them complete blood work, telling them exactly what to say in the doctor's office so it doesn't turn into an argument. And it's really tough because, as again, what I said before, they don't know. Like if they didn't have me, they wouldn't really know how to broach that. But at the same time, with like the health coaching piece of it, you mentioned in describing the experience, you talked a little bit about, the behavioral side of things and the accountability. So tell me why you feel that that aspect is important, because obviously I'm hugely on board with that piece too.
For sure. Yeah. I personally believe that the people power of any sort of healthcare or health and wellness experience is the most magical part of it. So I'm clearly a big believer in using data and technology to augment human expertise and improve scalability and everything like that. And that's our model. But I still think it, at least today, and I think for the foreseeable future, human to human connection and human to human accountability is at the core of getting great results when you want to take control of your health. So we didn't want to miss that ingredient when we built LifeForce. We see the health coach as really the connective tissue, because when you think about the experience, every 3 months you're having the retest and you're having the consult with the medical doctor, and you and the doctor are really aligning on what are the top 1 or 2 priorities for you. But then your health coach becomes your main accountability partner and support on that journey in between those retests. And I think there's a bit of a mix in how people like to use their coach, which is totally fine with us. Some people are pretty self-sufficient. Some people are sending, photos of their pets every morning, and we're happy with whatever works for you. But the belief is that, ultimately what we are selling is results from a program, and we're going to be able to drive the best results for you if we create the support and the continuity that you need to actually make the shifts in your life. And that could be anything from sticking with your supplementation or your pharmaceutical regime, or often and very commonly it's the fundamentals on the lifestyle change side. And so much of this conversation comes back to simplification and prioritization. You brought this up a few times, and I do really think it's the key in not only how you get the best results as a consumer, but which companies will win in this space. It's the companies that do the best in simplification and prioritization, because we see a lot of people coming to us and they're doing a bunch of stuff, or they want to work on a particular thing because they've heard about it on Instagram. And again, no criticism there, because I think curiosity is always a good thing about health. So the fact that all of this is happening and people are starting to ask about it is generally a good thing. But some of the time it's like someone wanting to, put new shutters on their house when the kitchen's on fire.
Yeah.
And you've got to have that conversation, say, totally understand the shutters are important, let's fix those. But also there's this other thing that we need to work on. And that's actually going to unlock all these other dimensions. And those are the sorts of conversations that you can best have with great doctors, great coaches backed by real data.
Yeah. I'm laughing at your analogy of the house. One that I say often to clients when they kind of express that is like, you're stepping over a bunch of $100 bills just to pick up some pennies. And it's like, let's just get the $100 bills first and we can get the pennies later. Like they have value, right? But in the last couple of weeks, I don't know if you've seen this, because I don't know that your own Instagram algorithm would show you something like this, but there's a trend going around Instagram and some of the other platforms right now that's called girl math. And it's basically like making fun of the way that women justify things in their head. The first one that started it had a lot to do with like spending money. So I don't know if you can attest to this in your own household, but it would be things like your partner saying that, they went to buy something at like Marshalls or TJ Maxx or wherever, and it was free because they returned something else and they got it off of the return, just like that logic. And it's funny because it's true. And like you've thought that in your head, and I can attest to that as a female. But in the last couple of days, I've put out a few posts on my own page where I've taken this like fitness and nutrition spin on girl math. And I posted one today and people have been really reacting to it. So I've been like thinking of a million of them and I'm having fun with it. And one of the ones I just posted this morning said, girl math is listening to a bunch of health and wellness podcasts and deciding to pick up an 18-step morning routine, but you still refuse to eat enough protein and wonder why you can't lose any weight. And it's like, that's what this is. But like, we can laugh about it, but there's people out there who like legitimately think this way every day. They argue with me sometimes when I'm trying to get them to change their perspective on it, but it is the reality for a lot of people. So I think to say on that.
Yeah. But I think it's also a really important thing to acknowledge and like honor what people care about. And I think we've all had the experience of going into a doctor's office and wanting to talk about something or having a question and getting shut down, and how demoralizing that is, and how much that then lowers the chances that you'll actually engage in those sort of conversations in the future. And a lot of the time that's not really it's not necessarily the fault of the doctor. Like folks are under a lot of pressure with no time and not the right data to have those conversations. But as the consumer, we really believe if someone comes in and there's something they care about, we need to really lean into that with them, because that is the gateway into a broader conversation about how they're doing. So, so if someone comes to us and really libido is their main concern, that's awesome. Like, great, let's help you with libido. And by the way, let's also help you with these couple of other things.
Right.
That I guess are, the girl math equivalent of buying the other thing at TJ Maxx. I think I might have lost the analogy, but you get my point.
Yeah, totally. No, you're right. And it's like the taking this one more step. It's like, if the person comes to you with the issue of libido, they don't yet realize this because no one's opening up the door for this conversation. But when they start to focus on the other things that we're asking them to pay attention to, because we do have that lens and we have that information to help them shift their perspective, the byproduct is the improved libido, and they start to see the connectivity. I see this so often with fat loss and weight loss clients in particular. They come to me looking for the change on the scale. But as we start to dive into the conversation a little bit further, it's like all of a sudden I'll be on a call with a potential client and they're really actually spending a lot of time telling me that they feel like really exhausted at 2 p.m. And I'm like, okay, so what you're really telling me here is there's something going on with your energy levels. And while I'm so supportive of you wanting to lose weight and change your physique, and I want you to have those desires and goals, I actually think if we address your energy levels first, you may find that we will, as a byproduct of that effort, start to lose the weight too. And when they can start to think that way, my clients are far and away more successful because they also tied it to something they care a lot about. So with your point and your example of libido, if they care a lot about it, they're going to make the commitment to do the things the coach is asking them to do, the things the doctor is asking them to do, because it's tied to something that they really care about, right? And we're human beings, and that's a motivator and a driver that's really necessary when you have so many other things in your life that may be competing with your time, your attention. You said it yourself, feeling rushed or whatever it is, and dealing with a lot of that stress. When we're in those situations and we start to feel like we're going to crumble, like what's the first thing you get rid of? The stuff that truthfully you don't really care that much about. You hate to admit you don't care that much about it, but that's part of what's going on there.
I think that's really well said. And it does actually intersect with the question around wise coaching, but I would just say the whole human component of our model important to us, because I think in any behavior change, if you can link the goal all the way through to what someone cares about at the sort of deeply personal level, you'll be much more successful. And it's hard to do that in a technology only solution. If an app asks you what's your motivation, a lot of the time people don't actually themselves really realize what the core deep motivation is until you dig into that. And that's the sort of conversation you can do. And I think discovering it, but then sharing it with another human being is a deeper level of accountability again. And then, once you understand that, then you can continue to sort of hold a mirror up for people and remind them of that deeper purpose why they want to put in the work to get healthier.
Yeah. So you were kind of hinting at it, but I wasn't planning on asking this question. I feel like it's relevant to what you just said and your experience with your career being in the technology space in particular. What do you think about AI and leveraging it in a way that it could help with the efficiency component of a company like yours without taking away from that human experience? Because I'll just add to that too, when things like Chat GPT started popping up, so many people were like, oh my God, personal trainers are going to have a problem because you could just type in 12-week program. I rolled my eyes because I was like, and what happens when you screenshot that on your phone and you never go to the gym? Forget it. It's not that simple. Yes, more people have access to information. That's awesome. If you choose to do something with it is what actually counts. And I don't think the human experience could really be replaced by something like that, in my opinion. But I'd really love to know where you kind of see that fitting in, because you've had experience with other health technology besides what you're doing at LifeForce.
I think it will be a massive unlock, particularly when we talked about things like access and lowering price points of different types of support. I think it'll be transformational there. TBD how long that will take. I'd say within the next 5 years, we'll definitely see AI driven products that do a pretty good job at a certain level of things and are able to deliver them at a drastically lower price, which overall is a fantastic trend. But I also think there's this concept in healthcare around doctors practicing at the top of their license, which effectively means minimizing the administrative or other sorts of work so they can really apply their trainings at the highest level of value for patients. And I actually think that in a way that's what AI will do for human beings overall. So allow human beings to practice at our highest level of humanity, because I do think, and I hope, this is just my my personal bias, I think there are things that are innately human, and I think those things are very powerful in the context of talking about your health and your body and your life. And the way we will use AI is to automate the things that make sense, to be able to extract better insights and better pattern recognition across the data that we're collecting, because over time we're going to add more and more data sets about what's happening in people's bodies.
Right.
But then, serve that up in a way that allows experts to develop connection, to drive relationship, and ultimately to drive better results for human beings.
Yeah. Let's go a little further into the data piece of what you just referenced around insights. One, would love to just kind of hear more about once somebody goes through the process with LifeForce, they do their initial testing and everything. having those conversations. One, what are some of the areas that you're looking at in terms of, is it a combination of hormones, peptides, supplementation recommendations, exercise regimen? Like, what does that piece look like? But then second to that, I'd really love for you to talk through, we have all these other pieces of tech, right? Like wearables. And I have on right now a Garmin, and I really use that to track my steps, but I also have my Oura ring on, right? And I think this conversation is so interesting because I could wear my Oura ring, but I could choose to do nothing with the data. I already knew I was a bad sleeper before I got my Oura ring. I've used the data like basically like drive the point home to my brain to be like, well, you need to do something about this because it's right in front of you. I just was confirming the bias. But I'd love to know how a service like LifeForce may see the opportunity to integrate this additional information that you could capture on a daily basis, because my Oura app is already doing that, and how that might influence the way one of your practitioners could support somebody like me with that information.
Yeah, so I guess I'll turn the question back to you as hopefully you'll be a customer of ours shortly. Yeah. But
I'm very excited to try it.
If you were working with a proactive health company like us, would you want your doctor to have access to all your wearables information to be able to see trends and use that to build a better program?
Yeah, I would, because listen, it goes back to the accountability piece for me too, of like calling me out and just being like, if the health coach was like, hey, why did you go to bed at 2 a.m.? Right? Or, hey, like I noticed the last couple of nights, like something dipped in your sleep. Where are you in your cycle? And like I track those things too. Like there's a really cool collaboration between the company Natural Cycles and Oura, and it's a different approach to birth control, but also actually understanding how your hormones change as a female on a monthly basis. I've only been using it for about a month. I love it because it's just asking me to track some additional information that still syncs up with my Oura ring, but it's asking me questions like, how did you feel today? Were you bloated? Were you tired? Were you this? Were you that? What was your libido like? And I don't ask myself those things every day, but because the app pushed it out to me, I'm like, oh, let me track this. Like, let me think about this a little bit more. So to answer your question further, I think it could only help, right? Because I think sometimes we don't really take a minute to reflect on like, how did I feel this week? I force my clients to do it every day too. Like I have questions that they have to answer every night. How was your sleep? How was your hunger cues? How was your digestion today? And the ones who don't take a few minutes to fill it out on a daily basis, I can see that they get more disconnected from potentially seeing results with my program, because they're kind of like waiting till the end of the week. And then so many things happen in your day to day, you forget.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. And we believe the same, and we will be incorporating wearables information and other sorts of diagnostics next year, in the first half of next year. And the way we think about that is any additional data set that helps us better understand what's happening in your body or your life is great, because it allows our doctors and our technology to build a more effective program for you. It also has a secondary benefit of potentially giving us another feedback loop to show that you're progressing, because nothing is more motivating than progress. And so whenever we can find another way to show you that this change or this intervention is working, and we're seeing that come through in biomarkers or in wearables information or something else, that's super valuable for continuing to reward and reinforce the behaviors that you've changed in your life. So a good example of this is hormone balance, for example. So say, and this is a pretty common use case. A man comes to us, is feeling lower energy, wants some help with body composition, maybe libido issues. And we run the blood-based biomarkers. We can see free testosterone's a little bit on the low side, but maybe not super low. And there's a few different paths we can take at that point. One place we always like to start is on the lifestyle side. And so we know that there's a strong correlation between sleep and testosterone levels. That's not something that a lot of our members understand when they come to us. And so when we explain, really improving sleep hygiene and sleep quality can itself rectify issues with testosterone, that's a great place to start. If we have access to someone's Oura ring or 8 sleep data and can take that from, a concept to an actual, yes, we can see that you're not sleeping as well as you could be, then that allows someone to make a change there that they might not have made before. Then, taking it to the next level, we also know that certain training programs, and I'm sure you've been deep in this as well, can help boost testosterone levels naturally. So lower body weights, particularly compound exercises, squats, deadlifts, etc. So if we're also able to integrate into a data set that shows us frequency of someone's workout and ideally, what they've been working out, so that our doctor in 3 months' time can look and say, okay, sleep has been fixed, exercise looks like it's on track, the testosterone level has or hasn't responded. The recommendation that follows that will be way more informed and way more valuable than just looking at the biomarker itself. So that's the vision. That's where we're heading towards.
Okay. I love that. And I really like your example of testosterone as well, because it is very much a lifestyle component that we have to address those changes. I've actually, make it female centric. I've experienced this in my own life. At one point during COVID, I had some really bad insomnia, and unfortunately it really caused my testosterone levels to tank. And I kind of knew that it was going on because I saw changes to my body composition that I was like, this makes sense. And I also understand that lack of sleep is going to directly impact that. But then I also went and I did a Dutch test. And for those of you listening who are like, what the heck is that? It is a sometimes $800 test where it's a urine test and you pee on a piece of paper, basically, for lack of a better way to describe it, over the course of 24-ish hours. And that actually establishes the pattern of your cortisol. And that was a part of my issue. But what's cool about that test is it also looks at progesterone and your patterns with your testosterone and how you're metabolizing it, not just the snapshot of what you could have seen when you draw your blood work. So I think there's really cool components of some of these other tests. But again, like we've been saying, that's not a test that the average person is going to run all the time. I didn't run it again after that. I started to pay attention to the lifestyle factors that I knew could help improve it, and just kind of hoped, okay, like I'm making these efforts, I'm doing these right things, it's going to move me in the direction that I want it to go. And I would have the evidence because my body composition started to change. My, energy levels were improving. My sleep was getting a little bit better. But those examples can be tricky because it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? With a lot of my female clients who are dealing with, they're at that age, and I don't even want to call it hormone replacement. I actually learned this from another doctor I had on the show. And I like how she said it, because she was like, why call it replacement? Like, we're talking about longevity. We're talking about optimization. They're just hormones that you are losing because you are getting older. It's not because you did something wrong. It's maybe you could have exercised a little differently, eaten better, sure. But it's just a part of life that if we're here to optimize, it's okay to add them in. And it's not from this place of like, we need to fix you. It's just from a place of you're looking for optimal. This should be a part of your routine. And I do want to ask you your thoughts around that in particular, because it's such a hot button topic. But just to kind of close the loop on this example, I really like that idea because, again, it can reinforce to the person, hey, yes, like we can look at supplements, we can look at some of these other interventions, but those are just band-aids unless you also follow through on the lifestyle side of things as shown by your aura, your Whoop, whatever it is out there. So I think that's very exciting. I imagine from the more like technical side of things with like privacy policies and that sort of stuff, I know that that can take longer than a lot of people can appreciate. I even see that myself. My clients use an app to track their food that links with the app that I coach them on. And it's always a little bit of a process just to get the two to talk to each other. And they only allow certain companies that they partner with on my app because they don't have the open interface, and it is what it is. But I imagine that'll be like a part of the roadblock or the timing of something like that transpiring for LifeForce too.
Yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of stuff to think through and make sure you do the right way in terms of data privacy. We're already down the road on it, so I'm feeling exciting. Good about the speed for us, and I think that'll be fun to roll out next year.
Nice. Yeah. But give me your take on hormones.
Sure. So to click at one level above that and then dive into hormones. So when members come to LifeForce and we run their first blood panel, we see 26% of their biomarkers on average are out of the optimal range. So we test about 45 different biomarkers on average, but 26% of them are out of the optimal range. So these are folks all over the spectrum in terms of health. Some people would identify themselves as very healthy, and then they often find things they need to be paying attention to. Sure. Other people know they've got work to do. When we dig in further to what's going on there, hormone balance is a a massive theme. It's potentially a very transformational thing to work on people with, but it needs to be done the right way. To be done the right way. So, 95% of members that come to us over the age of 40 have a hormone balance in, one of the major hormones: progesterone, estrogen, thyroid, or testosterone. So again, plenty of opportunity. And we are definitely on the side of personalized support for hormone balance. And this topic of what does it mean to be personalized is, I think, always important, but particularly when you're dealing with someone's hormones, because the way we think about it is personalization means having, the right data to really understand a customized protocol for you. So there are too many companies out there that will send you hormones or hormone related products, understanding very little about your body. We think that's a problem. We think it's got to be a component of a comprehensive plan, working with the right team. We also think it's a personal decision that people need education on. So to use the example before of the gentleman that comes in with low free testosterone, it's a very personal decision on how you want to address that. And there are all kinds of different interventions, from bioidentical hormones to just purely lifestyle changes, and they have different rewards, they have different risks, they have different time horizons. And we feel like the biggest service we can do on that is to educate people on, what are your life goals? How important is this to you? How quickly do you want to achieve them? And then here are the different solutions that you can choose from. Sure. And it's really your choice as the consumer to decide how you want to address that. There's not like one way to do it. And so, setting the table for people and then allowing them to make an informed decision is how we think about it.
I love that. And I think that's probably what you touched on about the lack of personalization is maybe where some of the stigmas around it and like the fear has come from for people, because all it takes is like the one anecdotal story of the person who had the bad experience. Right. And then I think there's just confusion as well around people who are taking steroids for bodybuilding and aesthetic purposes. If that's all it's really a lack of education that I think is driving a wedge in this conversation, alongside what I said, like that it's very important that it's done the right way. But my hope is that, especially with the female clients that I work with, that there is just a shift in this. But I think a lot of it goes back to what you were mentioning earlier about going into the doctor's office and sometimes feeling dismissed when speaking about symptoms, because females that I've had this conversation with, especially even like female practitioners, a lot of them are saying that the clients that they see, the patients that they see, are coming to them and being like, well, I tried to bring this up, but the response I got back was something along the lines of, oh, well, that's normal because you're going through menopause, or, oh, that's normal because you're reaching that age. But again, it just comes back to this idea of, well, are we looking for normal? Are we looking for optimal? And I'd actually love for you to clarify something that you mentioned, because I think this is important for everybody listening to understand. And I'd love to know LifeForce's process on this. You talked about the likelihood of most people who are doing their blood work, and the percentage that it was, I think you said 26% of people who have markers that are not optimal. How does LifeForce define optimal? And I'm asking this question because personally, the certifications that I've done for my own nutrition and knowledge and everything, I work off of pretty tight ranges of what's considered good versus bad. And those ranges rarely match what my clients are getting back when they go to the doctor's office. I'll look at their labs the second time and be like, well, if I was going to be a little tighter about this, I'd actually say you're slightly out of range for this marker that this company from whatever diagnostic center you went to said it was normal. So how does LifeForce look at that and address that?
For sure. And you've probably gone over this for your listeners before, but just to quickly recap, when you get a blood test back from one of the major labs, it's based on the reference range, which just reflects standard deviations of the population. So it's basically benchmarking you against the average health of the US population. And so if you're aspiring to be above average relative to the population, that doesn't help you very much. You need to be able to compare yourself to the range where people actually feel better, function better, live longer. And so we've created those ranges based on the empirical experience of our clinicians, including our medical director and the other doctors on the team. Plus, we have a clinical advisory board that we run this past. Plus, we look at where do medical associations in different specialties and subspecialties set their own points of view on what's optimal. And then there's always new research coming out to support this. There's actually new studies to demonstrate, where the best outcomes come from in terms of either, quality of life or onset of disease, et cetera. And all those things go into inform where we set the optimal range for people.
Now, you mentioned research, and I always love asking this question. It may be better suited for someone else on your team because it is a little bit more like medically and scientifically focused. And if that's your response, that's okay. But what is LifeForce stance on looking at some new research? Because I'm thinking of one conversation I had in particular over a year ago, but it's always stuck with me. I've interviewed Dr. Casey Means from Levels with their glucose monitor, and the service that they're building and creating, I think, is awesome. But something that she spent a lot of time explaining in that episode that was really eye-opening for me, that I think a lot of people don't understand, is when it comes to nutrition and health and some of these topics that we're discussing, based on like the gold standard of a study of research of what's acceptable and, like meets the scientific method and like all those things, what we're looking at is hard to study. And for that reason, there's lack of research or really bad studies based on those standards. And because that's such a trend, they're just not getting done. And then we have medical practitioners who are citing like things from the 80s versus revisiting these things, or like it's hard to approach. It then doesn't get funding. Like it all makes sense, but I just never really realized that. So for the work that you're doing and what your company is creating, how do you all think about that in trying to maybe influence that being a different story, or just how you're looking at this research to think about the service that you're providing?
So we're definitely on the same side of the argument as Dr. Casey and Levels, and they're a great company, love what they're doing as well. She probably shared that the average time it takes for a new research breakthrough to make its way into mainstream practice is about 17 years. So when you think of in a standard primary care setting, you're receiving care based on protocols that are nearly 2 decades out of date, potentially. So certainly one of the ways we think we're adding value to our members is shortening that. And so once something reaches a certain level of validation, we want to give people access to it on a much shorter timeline and keep people more on the leading edge. Having said that, we do not want to be the place that you go if you want to be a guinea pig or you want to do things that are experimental. That's a whole category, and good luck to folks if that's their personal decision to want to be more experimental. And there's places to do that for sure. But the balance we're trying to strike is, progressive but science-backed, and allowing people to be way more on the front foot about these things, but also being sort of the arbiter on behalf of our members of what's ready and what's not. And that's how we think about it. When we think you're bringing a new product onto the platform or a new type of diagnostic, we review all that with our advisory board, and we hold ourselves to a pretty high bar around if the evidence is there, if the risk return is where we need it to be, and if it is, awesome, we're all for it, and people should have access. If it's not, we'll keep an eye on it and we'll see what happens in the future. And I think you're raising a really important systemic point that, and we could get into a whole big conversation around the incentives of healthcare and why studies don't exist. But you're exactly right. Effectively, what we're working on is proactive care at scale for a population that we can keep healthier versus allow to deteriorate. And that's not something that's been studied well. So companies like us, companies like Levels, others in this space are kind of doing that research in the real world. And it's early days, but even when we think about what will we do with the data set we're collecting, there's an opportunity here to actually use that to help the research field understand more about how to deliver proactive care well.
Yeah, that's a really great point. I love that. I think that's amazing. And yeah, it's one of those things that obviously like time will tell how this starts to shift and everything. And like, it's a bigger beast to tackle, but I like to think too, with this concept around proactive versus reactive, that even coaches like myself and the coaching businesses that we have are helping contribute to that too. For me, I've mentioned this already. Yes, I love working with the client who wants to lose weight, but I've recently had a lot of clients shift their focus to measuring success based on what their biofeedback in terms of their biomarkers, their blood work is saying. And I've had a client as recently as a month ago, we share wins every week on our weekly Zoom calls. And she talked about that her DHEA levels had been really out of whack and I couldn't even figure out why. And then her hemoglobin A1C was borderline pre-diabetic. And her doctor kept telling her no shade, but was just like, don't eat carbs. And I was like, well, it's not that simple. And in the last 4 months of us working together, all of those numbers look so much better. And that's really, really exciting for me because that's how I see that the work that I'm doing with those clients is impacting in a really big way. So I think that's, we're all on the same team and in it together, like towards that effort, which I think is really awesome. And we could probably talk forever, but we're already coming up on over an hour. So I want to be respectful of your time. And I like to end my episodes with a little lightning round of some fun questions, but I have one more question I meant to ask you at the very beginning of this that I want to ask because I think it's interesting. Obviously, everyone's been listening to this episode for a while, can tell that you are not from the United States and you have a lovely Australian accent. And having, personally, and you may laugh at this, but this is just my perception. I've felt like in the fitness world, Australia is just very fit. Like you think about the fitness influencers that have come out of there, some of whom are like really famous. And I think that's a part of it. Like there are some big names on Instagram and they all happen to be Australian. So I feel like in Australia, people do definitely prioritize their health and wellness. So having lived in the US as long as you have, doing the work that you do, what is your perspective and like the cultural differences and how that might be playing into some of the things that we're seeing here in this shift in priorities or the way we in the US kind of live our lifestyles?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunately a little bit of a misperception and good branding maybe from Australia.
Yeah.
If you look at the stats, I think Australia is the second or third highest rate of obesity after the US. But having said that, there is definitely a large culture around fitness and health and wellness, and it's a sporty culture, it's an outdoors culture. People like to look good, so that's a real thing, and it's there. But there's also plenty of other problems that are there as well, just like they are in the US. But I do think Australia does seem to be sort of leading the conversation in some ways around health and wellness and fitness technology, and that's awesome. Super exciting to see. And I always love talking to folks back home who are working on that. I would say, we've had plenty of people reach out wanting to take LifeForce to Australia as well. So definitely a need. I would say overall, I think, not to generalize too much, but I feel like the US is maybe more of a country of extremes than Australia, meaning, and this just doesn't relate to healthcare, but I feel like the US has, generally the best and the worst of nearly everything. It could be education, it could be healthcare, it could be any number of things. Whereas I feel like Australia, and I lived in the UK as well for a while, is probably a little bit more clumped around the mean there. But I don't have the stats to back that up. That's just my gut hunch.
Interesting. No, that's very interesting. I've never been to Australia, but my college roommate lives in the UK. So I do feel like you make a good point there about like the best and the worst. And it's all about your perception of like what what you've been exposed to, what you don't, right? For anybody listening to this too. So I wanted to throw that in there at the beginning when we were kind of diving into the conversation just around like healthcare and how this all sort of came together for you personally. So thank you for answering that.
Yeah. One thing I'll just add as a PS on that is I do think the US excels in just this belief that you can change the system. You can have a big swing, and that's the American dream. But it's so powerful, and I do think that it's stronger here than other countries, and just this sense that even if you're just one person, if not you, then whom, to fix some of these things. And I find that personally very inspiring to be in that culture, and it's something I've loved living here.
Yeah, for sure. And, I can appreciate that for so many reasons, but especially as an entrepreneur, right? Like the environment plays such a big factor in what we do believe and think is possible. And, from a perspective of gratitude, the way that I grew up, the things that I've been exposed to, the people that I've met, and the access that I've been afforded to have, like, I don't think some of those ideas that I have or the willingness to go for it would be possible. And I couldn't agree more. I think that's really cool. And that's really cool to hear from your perspective as well, too. So thanks for sharing that.
Sure.
Yeah. All right. We're going to go to our lightning round. Like I said, fun questions. I'll keep it health and fitness related for the most part. You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. If you could only, you look like a pretty fit guy over there. If you could only do one exercise, you got to pick upper or lower body. You only get to do one, or you can give me like a full body movement. But if you can only do one for the rest of your life, like whether it's some kind of lift or another activity, what is it?
It would be deadlifts. It would be deadlifts. Yeah.
Good choice. I usually pick that answer when I ask people this question. Now, on the opposite end of the spectrum, if you could get rid of one that you know it's good for you, but you never want to do it again, what is it?
I think that would be anything VO2 max.
Okay.
It's painful, especially when you're on your own in your garage at 6 a.m. trying to get yourself into that zone. It sucks. I know it's good, but it really sucks.
Yeah. Do you work out solo? You just mentioned in your garage, or do you go to the gym?
Mostly solo. So
Nice.
usually sort of 5:30 till 6:30, you'll find me in the garage in the morning. But I do still love going to the gym. There's something about having everyone around, and
Oh yeah.
it's a different environment.
But I think it changes when you have kids and you're like, I got to get it in, right?
That's right. Take it where you can get it.
Yeah. Shifting to food. What is your absolute favorite food? Maybe give me one in the US and then maybe like a food or a cuisine that's more specific to Australia.
Yeah, maybe this is recency bias, but I had an excellent surf and turf burrito yesterday.
Oh, nice.
So I just think the burrito game, particularly in California, is world class, and I'll always be up for that. And then Australia is huge on breakfast, so really well done avocado toast, some feta cheese, some chili flakes, some good bread. That's tough to beat.
I mentioned to you that I had another recent Australian friend on the show, and I don't think I asked this question because he lives in New York. So I asked like favorite foods in New York, but I did know from talking to him that you guys are big breakfast people. I'm a huge breakfast person. Like if you ask me what's the one food I'm eating for the rest of my life, I'm going to say some variation of eggs. So I guess this is a good reason for me to go to Australia.
Yeah, I think breakfast might be Australia's best export. So
Nice.
You should definitely get out there.
Good to know. Very good to know. Shifting a little bit more towards education and things like that. Favorite book or most recent book that you've read or possibly listened to?
So recently read Outlive by Peter Attia,
Nice.
which I consider the best single resource in this conversation around proactive health and longevity, and is definitely philosophically very aligned with how we think about it at LifeForce. And then Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, just in terms of a personal practice and trying to keep perspective in life. That's one that I've found really helpful, and occasionally I'll recommend that to other folks as well.
Nice. I got one more question, and it can be a little longer of an answer. It's totally allowed. Everybody's been listening throughout this entire conversation, but maybe they can only take one thing with them. What's your overarching message around what we've spoken about, around longevity, around life force, that if they turn this off and that's the only thing they can remember, what do you want to leave them with?
I would leave them with the message around make things simpler for yourself and do what you need to do to just really understand what are the top one or two things to work on, and don't worry about anything else and just focus on those things. I think that super easy to get overwhelmed. We're in this world now where we have an abundance of content, we have abundance of products. But the biggest unlock that I've seen is when people can really narrow in on what are those one or two things they care about most and that are going to help them live better and live longer. So whether that's with us or another way, I think once you've made the choice, and it is a choice, to be proactive around how you live your life and how you manage your health, it starts with just getting lasered in on what are those one or two things. And then you'll get wins there, you'll be more successful, and that creates a nice flywheel.
Amazing. So well said. I love it. Last and very most important question. How can we stay connected with you? How can we stay connected with LifeForce? I'm going to link down in the show notes, of course, if anybody's interested in learning more about using LifeForce and getting involved, we'll make sure we have all that down there too. But if somebody wants to connect with you guys on social media, tell us where to do that.
Sure. So we're at mylifeforce.com is the website, and we're at Go Lifeforce on Instagram and Twitter. So we'd love to chat to people. If any of this conversation's inspired questions or thoughts, shoot it over to us. And if you're ready to get started, we're ready to be a partner in this. So hopefully it's been helpful. Hopefully it's got people thinking about things a little bit differently. And I've really enjoyed the chat. So thanks for having me on.
Thank you. And I'm very excited. I'll just plug to the listeners that I am actually myself going to go through the experience and have the phlebotomist come to my house and do it all. So everyone stay tuned, because I will be sharing more about that on social media, and it'll be fun to kind of loop you back in and talk more about it at that time. So thank you again for this opportunity. It's been so great chatting with you. Definitely looking forward to seeing where LifeForce continues to go and grow. And I think there will be a multitude of reasons to have you back on the show as that kind of progresses. So excited for you to be a new face around this community. And I really appreciate your time.